Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. Larry and Campbell, I'm not going to act like we haven't talked before, and I'm not going to act like we just didn't talk for like 30 minutes off air. So let's kick into it. Let's talk about the government. Let's talk about conspiracies. I don't care. We can start with UFOs and we can just drift across the board. But honestly, at this point, I'm just as much in belief of the deep state as anybody out there. And I don't think it's a large majority that believes in a deep state. So I might be alone on that island like Tom Hanks in Castaway. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks, Robbie. It's really great to be here again.
Glad you enjoyed it. I'm glad you guys are back. I got you hooked. All right, great. Larry, how you doing, man?
I'm doing much better now, and the sun is shining, and it's not so obviously winter, which I hate.
60 degrees here, and it feels great. Fantastic. December climate change isn't real. I'm just kidding. I'm not going to fight that fight. That's too big. I'd rather just handle JFK topics from now on. But where would you guys like to start? I mean, I want to obviously start with some like the identity of conspiracies and the fact that somehow everything that is reasonable, in my opinion, I would say critical thinking skills on a lot of certain situations and stuff like that gets labeled as a conspiracy. I mean, obviously me and Larry have been focused into the JFK topic for a while. I haven't really dived into the whole UAP subject or anything of that sort. And we'll draw a hard line between those two because they're not connected in any single way. Like that, Larry, I did that because I knew. Cut the line in. But there's real like questions and things that people should probably be given answers to that necessarily aren't given answers to. And it's a shame in our society that when we do ask questions about certain specific subjects, that it either gets laughed at or rolled at when they could be serious events.
Well, that's very true, Robbie.
I would say one of the problems is all of us know that life involves conspiracies. I mean, whether it was the first three kids that you met and hooked up with on the playground, like, it's just natural. It's a national social effect. It's part of the human phenomena that people get together, and that if they have a common agenda, they will pursue it. And oftentimes they pursue it in secret. They may pursue it covertly. So conspiracy is part of the nature of the beast. I mean, you will find conspiracy in business. Okay, go back to the yellow journalism and trust busting. Yes, there are trust. Obviously, there are trust in business. Even businesses that are supposed to be competing and run advertisements against each other in the back rooms. Yeah, they do deals. So I think we all have to accept that there's conspiracy everywhere. But I think what hurts the whole point is thinking that is unusual, unique. It's not part of the social dynamic, and thinking that it's something special. It's just the way people operate. That's the dynamic. And so calling everything a conspiracy is kind of like calling human behavior, a conspiracy. Is it there? Sure it is. But because you can find so many examples of it, you can just totally get carried away with it. And I personally I work really hard at separating, stupid, which you find all over the place as well. I mean, people do behave stupidly. We see that in politics. There's some great examples of politics going on right now, where I lied about everything in the world and about my background, my finances, my mother, and I still get elected, right? I mean, is that conspiratorial or stupid? You draw the line. But I guess what I work really hard at is trying to separate those things that are generic from something that is special. And sure, we find special conspiracies. I guess the last comment I'd make about that, though, is I probably find more what you would call conspiracy to cover up activities that were inappropriate, that were done off the books, that were done for private reasons, that were done for personal gain reasons, or just that they were done. And after you're finished, so, it didn't work out like you planned, or something happened, and somebody wants to take a look at it, and you're going, no, no, I don't want people looking at this. And for example, we see an immense amount of that, both, you know, we see it all over the place. Certainly, we see it with federal agencies who do things actually that are very reasonable when they're doing them. And then after the fact, it's like, okay, we really don't want to admit that we did that. Yeah, did we try to overthrow this government? Yeah, okay, yeah, but let's not. This is bad for public relations. So I guess, Robbie, I would say, am I a believer in conspiracies? Certainly. But I think that you have to be very cautious to kind of filter out, what really is an organized conspiracy with a particular focus involving, a small group of people to accomplish something, versus just the way the world works. And that's my overall view after having stumbling over conspiracies, in several different genres. I mean, after writing a dozen books, I think it's safe to say that I stumble over conspiracy all the time, and real conspiracies, and then just stupid stuff.
I think they make it up as they go along, like a lot of the cover up stuff. I think eventually
Yes.
they add it up, and then when it gets to the ending, when someone's like tried to managely shove all those puzzle pieces together to be able to expose something, it just looks so bad. There's not a whole lot of wanting to come forward and talk about those things. I mean, it's our fault as a society for not, understanding and kind of accepting that not every government, or our government is not the only government that's messed up. Okay. It's every government is doing some type of intelligence operation or some type of thing or manipulation. They're all doing it. It's like a gun to everybody's head. There's like nobody that's safe, even the small child holding a lollipop. The issue starts to become is that when something does get published and then you cannot find it anymore, which is something that the internet has been doing. I talked briefly a while back, I think when last time we did our group discussion together, which was about Biden using psychological weapons and apologizing for it. And he made a public statement about it. I had the news article and I had pulled it up on air before and I could not find it now. So I start going, is this real? I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that or even seen anything like that before, but it was on a news thing. I had pulled it up in an episode I did with like Joe Green, Richard Bartholomew, and all those guys. It was a Center for Deep Political Research, I think is the episode title name. But I talked about that and everyone else agreed that they saw that as well too, but I cannot find that anymore. I went through 50 different 100 different results and I start going, how many, like, I mean, I started to believe more in the alien thing after doing the JFK stuff. And I'm not saying those those are related. I'm just saying I realized that the government, like, just amount of like what they think that they're doing right is pretty horrible. And what I mean by that is like, look at the investigations, for instance, the Warren Commission, the Robertson panel, the HSCA. I mean, were they really investigations or were they built to fail? I mean, that's a real good question you can ask. I think the public gets the information like the Warren Commission is the only investigation into JFK, and it's not. The HSCA, as hindered as it was, still was able to prove a lot of things and a lot of things that I think are beneficial to talk about, but history books don't remember that. When I spoke to Blakey from his own personal account, he goes, the CIA didn't give us all the documents we wanted because these agencies aren't actually there to try and help you try and solve things. The agencies have an agenda. And I think when it comes to that agenda, I think the agenda is what is going to make the government and keep this instilled idea of what the government is to the people. And I think when a lot of things start going over, it's because we, as the public, do not filter in that it's not just our government that's doing this type of stuff. There's a bigger play. If they say they're doing something to protect us, it's because probably they have information that another government's doing something else. I mean, that's a big example with Russian troll farms. Government comes in and fake accounts online, trying to sort out through bots and people. And some people go, it's the government, they're spying on us. Well, actually, they're also doing another job, which is trying to sort out the amount of political propaganda that's going from another side and making sure that you don't experience that as much as the Facebook is trying to censor and how much as other things are trying to censor. It's just weird they don't draw a distinction between what they are actually censoring. I mean, that word disinformation has now become any information that doesn't fit a certain political party, such as like the Hunter Biden laptop scenario or things of that sort. And I think that's just natural about people. We tend to say, here's the guidelines, and then you start to notice that you might be following the guidelines, but the people who set the guidelines have said, time out. I'm going to put these off to the side real quick, and then I'm going to do what I have to do. And then I'm going to put the bar back down. And that is real. That is true. And that is what happens in today's world. And I don't think it's just American government. I think that's everybody. I think that's just natural human thing about us, is that we are trying to cover up because in our mind, we think either some people can't handle it. I think we'll start off with the alien topic just so we can swing in Campbell's field a little bit before we go later down the road into maybe some JFK stuff. But lying about, I mean, I have documents I'll pull up later in this, but it's UFO photos and drawings of UFOs, whatever they thought they're real or whatever they thought they looked like or whatever was being described to them. Well, the government didn't even acknowledge their existence and would say that, no, this is crazy talk. You're a nut job. You got to put on a tinfoil hat. But they documented it pretty well. So I'm not saying I believe in aliens. I'm just saying when they're lying to you and telling you, no, nothing's going on, and then there is something going on, when someone goes to question that, they shouldn't be deemed or put in an insane asylum or, called the crazy nut job wacko, because then now you have what we have now, which is a bunch of people that have gotten acknowledgement from the government that there is things that they can't explain. And do they feel validated? Yes, but also they want to burn the government down more than ever. And I don't agree with that either. I think you just need to have open transparency.
Well, Robbie, if I can go back to your first question or statement and then loop it into what you just said, there are inevitably conspiracies throughout history. And I'll just begin by saying that I am a skeptic. I approach these things from my worldview, my lens, which is primarily rooted in the scientific method, empiricism, philosophical materialism. I'm not 100% committed to it, but I believe it's the most likely. So that's sort of the way I approach these things. There are undoubtedly conspiracies that are occurring at all times. We have proof, long-standing proof of huge levels of conspiracy. So there's very good reasons to think that conspiracies are happening. The question is which ones are happening right now. And that's when we get into these documents that are so interesting in the National Archives. And maybe in one way where JFK and UFO stuff is linked in an important sense is in the internal, the way that we look through the National Archives and find the communication strategy that is being adopted by the government on these subjects is similar in some senses in a broader way, where you look at the internal documents and they're inconsistent with the public-facing explanations for things. And that's where, as a historian, regardless of your worldview, you can get into the details and really zoom in on what they are trying to accomplish with what they're saying to people. And I just wanted to say too that Larry is certainly more knowledgeable and expert on the UFO subject than I am, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today, Larry, and hear your perspectives. Do you have any thoughts on what I was saying there? Do you think that there is that sort of underlying connection here with the documents being inconsistent with the public-facing statements of the government?
Especially in regard to UFOs or UAPs. One of the things we really don't take into consideration is, like it or love it, at least there are laws that require for government agencies and politicians, people in the federal government, there are document control laws that require that documents go into files and ultimately go to NARA, go into the National Archives as part of our national history. And that those laws exist. And we can fight with the agencies, all we want to about did they release things, did they redact things. There is nothing similar for the military. There literally is nothing. So if I want to, as a historian, if I want to research the Kennedy administration or the Truman administration or some of the more recent administrations, certainly there are places I can go in the National Archives, and I can go to the presidential libraries, you know, and I can find documents. I might not find everything I want, but there's a process. If I want to go and look into uh, UFO events at ICBM bases in the 1970s or 1980s, there was absolutely nothing that required anything to be archived that was reported to the National Military Command Center, to NORAD, to any operational group. There's nothing that requires that situation reps, sit reps be, reported and stored in a central archive. If you want to find them and you're lucky enough to find them, what you have to do is do a FOIA to obtain them directly from the Air Force, from you've got to go and ask for it yourself. You can't, and you've got to get it from the agency. You're not going to get it from the National Archives. The National Archives is not collecting that from the military. So it's really it's an interesting problem in that we do at least have some recourse for history for the federal government. We really don't have any recourse. I've spent loads of time, and it's not that the historians, the Air Force historian, the Navy historian, it's not that those people don't want to be helpful and aren't helpful, but quite frankly, the rules for filing and preserving records within the military are totally different. Things have improved within the federal government within the last 30 or 40 years. Nothing has changed. And that's one of the reasons I think it's fascinating that currently there's a lot of criticism for the current DOD investigations based on you people aren't even looking at, how can you say you don't know about anything that happened at ICBM installations in the 1970s? And the answer is, well, no, they don't. They really don't. They probably know less than the UFO researchers do because they don't have a body of information to look at. Unless they get the right book by a UFO author, something like Solis's book, they're not going to know it. So it appears stupid in a way, but the military has not nearly the same sense of history in terms of collecting and preserving stuff, even though they all have historians. And the historians are at the mercy of what a particular service or a particular unit. I mean, there are unit histories. Who wrote the unit history? Were they really a historian? Well, I will tell you, when I was in the Air Force for a short period of time, I wrote the unit history because I was low man on the totem pole, and that's what you get, But you also, if somebody says, don't put this in the unit history, you don't put it in the unit history. I'm like, okay. So I think that's it's an interesting quandary. The same thing really burdens us in the UFO arena. We hate classification, and in the JFK, we hate that there are classified documents from agencies that we can't see, or redacted documents that we can't see. Things were even worse in the military. Back when Blue Book, the UFO, Air Force UFO project, was in play, Blue Book farmed out a study to Rand Corp to do a statistical analysis, a geographic analysis to really evaluate where and when UFO sightings were occurring. Sounds pretty cool. Maybe you will find something there. Just so happens right now I'm involved with a group doing the same thing. One of the advantages we have that Rand didn't have is because of classification, the Air Force was not allowed or did not share anything with Rand Corp about the atomic weapons complex because all of that was classified. They didn't tell them where the stockpile sites were. They didn't tell them where the weapons deployments were. So if Rand starts looking for a pattern that might relate to atomic weapons, they don't know what to map to. They literally couldn't have that information, which we have now. But it just shows you that, bottom line, the government has a hard time investigating itself. Okay. But even when the Air Force was trying to do work, classification got in its way, because at that time, Ruppelt, Air Force guy in charge of Blue Book, seriously did want to address that particular problem. Like, is there a relationship between UFO activity and atomic weapons? He thought there was. Okay. And at that point in time, the chief of Air Force intelligence thought there was. And they were actually looking for justification to fund a really serious collections project, assign interceptors, place radars, to look at this. But then they found themselves, it's kind of like, okay, great, now farm this out. I've got money to do the study, but I can't tell them what to really study. Okay, so it imploded, and nothing came out of it. So these are problems we face all the time internally. Do they relate to conspiracy? No, they're systems problems. I guess I have to say, our hands are bound by systems problems in terms of getting history on a lot of things, because we want history and we want transparency, and both intelligence agencies and the military are kind of constitutionally, their interests are different than our interest, right?
There's from a conversation I had with someone who worked in the Freedom of Information Act offices that would file those Freedom of Information Act requests. It definitely changed my opinion on the whole process. I would think, like, why the hell does it take 7-8 years for someone to get a damn document from you guys? And then he kind of explained it like it's like not a government organization. It's kind of just an organization that has to request documents from the CIA and the FBI, and those people hold it on for however long, whether they consider it a priority or they get to it when they get to it. But when it comes to agencies not communicating with each other, this idea of the military industrial complex, people like to think that they're all calling each other every single day and talking about their boyfriends and girlfriends and doing all these types of things, which is just not true. I mean, you can look at the example of the Watergate hearing. When they go, do you have this document that this says? I think that's the FBI's document. And then they go to talk to the FBI. Actually, it's the NSA's document. And they go talk to the NSA, and it's this whole circle game where even someone in one of the testimonies stated, like, this is what they do. It's a tactic. They keep having you bounce around, bounce around, bounce around. Could be true. Could be a tactic to keep delaying and delaying and delaying until eventually they have to give you the document after maybe it buys them a month time or 2 months time or however long it takes for them to get the document. Or it's also the fact that they do not talk to each other. The reason why the CIA, the Warren Commission, felt that the CIA was withholding documents, hindering their investigation as well, too. I mean, it's the best quote is from Hale Boggs when it's in 71, where he's talking about J. Edgar Hoover. And he goes, J. Edgar Hoover and his FBI have abused the Bill of Rights by wiretapping on Americans. And what does the reporter say to him? He goes, where is your evidence for those claims? Now, we know now, because after Hoover died, it all came out. But he even said, he goes, well, you're not going to get the evidence that you want because what you're asking for is the FBI to investigate the FBI. And it's like, yeah, it's like you're going to have the Federal Bureau of Investigations look into all the bad stuff that they do. And trust me, I've seen plenty of articles about the FBI having bad views about J. Edgar Hoover, but also that's their boss at the time. And if you're asking someone to put their whole job on the line to speak out against maybe their boss doing something or the director of the FBI, the organization that they work for, and ruin their whole livelihood, then they're justified and not doing that, because why would the hell would you give up everything just for this idea of like, I'm going to put my job and everything on the line? Makes a lot of sense. What I do put more weight in is the fact that Boggs missing plane over Alaska. That was in 72 and 71. He made statements about Hoover where afterwards there's people from the commission that had to talk to him about the statements that he made about Hoover, which didn't come out until after Hoover was dead. So I put a little bit more weight about that into a suspicious death. I didn't before, but after seeing that 8-minute clip of him testifying and saying, "Oh, I'm not going to talk about that," or, all the stuff about the FBI investigating itself, I go, shit. Like, look, I would say that would be a conspiracy. I think planes go missing all the time, but damn it, if that doesn't just add a little bit more weight into that one for me, I'm sorry. But it is that intelligence idea. I mean, these agencies talk shit on each other in documents and they
I,
withhold stuff from each other.
I think that's really important to remember, which is part of why the government can investigate itself. I think probably my classic would be, well, there are two classics. One of the things is we know that the CIA continually stole informants and assets. It was just, they would ask another agency for their list. Okay, ask DEA for their list of drug informants, and I've seen the documents, and DEA would give it to them, and a year later there's a memo that says, wait a minute, these guys are all working for the CIA and they're not working for us anymore. The CIA had a terrible reputation for poaching assets. Okay, but I think the most classic case of agencies that they're in competition. You've got to remember that, especially the FBI and CIA are in competition. Just like the FBI is in competition in many instances with local law enforcement, and local law enforcement will tell you that. Oh, they took our case away from us. They don't tell us anything, and they want to know everything we know. But I think the classic is that we've probably all heard of is when somebody comes to Hoover within the FBI and they want to initiate a new program where they're going to be working with the CIA on something, and Hoover puts a little note on it that says, all right, if you want to do this, go ahead, but I don't trust them, and I'll never forget how they lied to us about Oswald in Mexico City. Like, what? If I only knew what he meant by that. I mean, clearly he knew that the CIA was lying to the FBI about things going on with Oswald in Mexico City. If it's like J. Edgar, could you just have put a footnote on there and said what that really was? But that's a good example. Like, this is the head of the FBI saying, okay, you can work with the CIA, but don't trust them because they'll lie to you. Given that, how would you ever expect that we can, that you can have a commission to investigate the government, and they're going to not be stonewalled, and they're not going to be, given just the information anyway. So even though I might be a little hesitant about conspiracy in some cases, I'm always open to the fact that the government, federal agencies are federal agencies, and they all have day jobs, and they often conflict.
I challenge any ideology of a conspiracy when there's a double standard. If you said that the FBI or whoever killed Martin Luther King, most of the general public will go, okay, wouldn't have any rebuttal about that. But when you bring it up with the JFK subject, there's immediately a rebuttal from the people that would be lone nutters. And I go, you can't do that. There is none of this double standard. I think when you look at J. Edgar Hoover, it wasn't necessarily about a certain thing. It was more about him being wanting to be the world police. I mean, he was going through the movies to cinema and Hollywood, blacklisting actors and searching people's profiles for communism. He's the reason why whenever the FBI goes on screen in a movie, you immediately think the badasses are here because of the production code office that said that the bad guys could fire as many shots as they want, but they have to miss. There was a rule in there. They propagandized their image to brainwash into the people that the FBI was this top-notch bureau. Now, there's a lot of things like COINTELPRO, invading the FBI, invading the Black Panther Party and inserting radicals in there for a reason of the Black Panther Party getting paranoid and causing them to attack each other and do things of that sort. But also what they don't mention in the history books, and it's not acknowledged in the history books, is the fact that they created a fake coloring book and gave it to the white donors of the Black Panther Party that had Black people beating up white people. And the people that were funding these programs, oh, I don't want to fund this. And they pulled out. Also, a fake death threat or a suicide note to Martin Luther King. Like, that is really dark shit. And that's Hoover. And everywhere you start kind of going in. So like, where do we talk about conspiracy and where does the line get drawn? Now, when I talk about Hoover and we say he never acknowledged the mob, that was a famous thing. And obviously I called the conspiracy for the longest time, Hoover an address. I have the fucking photo. I can show you the photo. And people say, well, how do I know that's not manipulated? Well, if that's manipulated, then the Oswald photograph is in the same ballpark as being manipulated as well, too. So let's just not even go to that yet. When I talk about Hoover being an address, the one thing that adds more weight for that for me is when I talk to a gay historian who studies specifically LGBTQ history. And I talked about Hoover, and she mentioned Hoover was gay and he did have a lover named Clyde Tolson. I'm just saying, to me, that added more weight into the theory of him being gay. But what I would tell the public, if I was going to bring people into this idea of conspiracy, I would say what's more reasonable is that Hoover liked to go to the track and the mob owned the track. So they fixed races for him. So of course he's not going to acknowledge that the mob's existence or want to investigate them because it would mess up with a lot of his betting that he does at the track. I think that's a more reasonable take than going the whole Clyde Tolson route. But I think there's weight in the Clyde Tolson thing. The issue is that Hoover, much like someone recently who chose to protest the anti-gay bill, or no, he chose to support the anti-gay bill, ended up going to his fucking son's gay wedding. Like he's a hypocrite. Hoover, hypocrite, looking for homosexuals and communists, seeing himself as a purist, but under the sheets, maybe gay. I don't know. I think that's obviously harder to get people to get in on that boat. It's easier to say that the mob, and the betting and all that.
Well, Robbie,
you just one
it's,
thing,
yeah.
just keep in mind, high level, you can always you can capture the basic Hoover. I mean, if you just want an image of Hoover, anyone that has enough nerve to, in their memoranda, designate FBI headquarters as the seat of government, and that's what SOG, seat of government, you pretty much captured it all right there. That's the way Hoover. That's the way Hoover thought. That's the way Hoover operated. Everything kind of falls under that. But but now Hoover was not a big fan of UFOs, so that's another story.
Individuals are often motivated by what they perceive to be good intentions, right? Like, I think we all agree with that. It's rare to find someone who internally believes that they're acting in an evil way. So when we look back on this, it is fascinating to see these obvious hypocrisies and discrepancies. To imagine that Hoover genuinely, and I believe he did believe that he was acting in the best national security interest of the United States, that leads to psychological questions more than anything. How is it possible for this person to believe that given X, Y, Z? And there's a lot of that going on underlying these conspiracies. Now, Robbie, I know that this name always makes you chuckle, but Noam Chomsky, as a historian, is independent of his politics, has done excellent work listing through a wide variety of real historical conspiracies. And he also makes a really important distinction that often when you have a collection of individuals who occupy the same social standing in society, they can behave entirely independently and produce the appearance of collaboration and conspiracy. And so, those things can be happening even simultaneously. And so it gets very tricky. And so when you get into conspiracy, the study of conspiracy culture, you find that there's conspiracies which are verifiable through the documentation explicitly, and then there are soft conspiracies which are making reasonable inferences off of the information without being verified, and then there are hard conspiracies, which is sort of what I think everybody on this panel agrees are like out there and maybe should be secondary to the consideration of everything else. I would just say that one thing that I think is important when discussing conspiracies is to hold back as much as possible from leaning into the inferences. Just as somebody who doesn't sort of dive into the conspiracy culture too much, I'm very open and interested actively in hearing the things that are like learning about those documents concerning Martin Luther King Jr., right prior to his assassination. Like the FBI sending him letter or his wife letters and stuff like that. It's just beyond anything like you could imagine. And if it wasn't verified, it would be hard to believe. And so that type of thing, I think, is what if we as skeptics want to maintain an open mind and engage with this honestly, I think that drilling into those proven things are as essential before then moving into the more speculative things, because even if those foundational things are verifiable, and then you say, and then it appears that this may also be the case, there tends to be an impulse psychologically to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And do you guys have any thoughts on maybe threading that needle where you could say, like, this new document drop about JFK, there is actually verification that the CIA did have internal communications about Oswald before the assassination, which they've denied for years. That's a conspiracy that's been verified now from that drop. To sort of people who have the expertise and knowledge leaning into it, know all of the information, like that is sort of like, yeah, of course. But to people from the outside just learning for the first time, it's like, oh, that's quite notable. Is there any way to sort of like stick to that fundamental thing without jumping into these things for people sort of like me who would have an open mind to those things, but get sort of scared off by the more speculative elements? Either, I guess, maybe Larry, I'd love to hear your opinion since you've investigated these subjects from a historian's perspective for so long.
Well, I think I can give you a couple examples, and it relates to the current document releases. And if you try to be very hard nosed and say, look, we know what the federal agencies are supposed to do. We do know what their day job consists of. Now, you've got all kinds of personal strangeness, like we were just talking about with Hoover. Interestingly enough, though, Hoover would say one of the reasons, for example, that Hoover would not provide protection when there were death threats against King is Hoover had a personal antipathy towards King, but he would cover this up by saying, the law, we're a federal agency. That's not within our purview. That's not in our day job. We do not investigate local crimes. A threat against King in Mississippi is a local crime. We'll copy law enforcement. And now the sad part is we'll copy law enforcement, and we now know that the people that were actually threatening King were local law enforcement in Mississippi. So there's a problem there. Okay. But I mean, if you try to separate their day job, what they should be legally or what they should be doing, and say, look, if we find evidence that they're doing that, it doesn't necessarily indicate conspiracy. Let's look at the CIA and Oswald. For example, we absolutely know for certain that CIA domestic operations made inquiries into Lee Oswald after his return from the Soviet Union. Would we be shocked about that? No, we really shouldn't be. It's sort of like, did he become an agent of a foreign power? Both the FBI and the CIA would have a legal right to look into that. The FBI probably more so than the CIA, but what the CIA would be really looking at, the FBI would be looking at him, had he become an agent, the CIA is going to look at, is he connecting with any foreign networks that are in the United States? And the CIA absolutely was aware of those. We have documents on an incident related to something that's codenamed Tumbleweed, which was a Soviet agent in Europe who actually relocated to the U.S., started spying on military facilities and reporting his information back to the Soviets through the Soviet embassy in Mexico City. Okay, there's ample reason for both the CIA and FBI to be interested in this sort of stuff. So their agent out of Dallas, a fellow named J. Walton Moore, actually admitted that he reached out to some of his local sources and said, look, I want you to kind of overwatch on this Lee Oswald fellow and his Russian wife when he comes back to the United States, see who he's talking to, see who he's talking to in the white Russian community. There was a Russian-speaking community in Fort Worth. See who he's, who might he be in contact with that we could be looking at as foreign agents? Okay, so there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, if he's not doing that, you would kind of say, you guys are not doing your job, right? Okay. So if we start at that, let's look and say, what's suspicious? Is there anything suspicious? The suspicious part is we don't have anything from J. Walton Moore's files that relates to Lee Harvey Oswald. We do have a couple of documents, but we have the documents that should be there that he himself admitted to having been involved with are not there. That is suspicious. Are they there because, you know, there's routing information on those memos saying that there were other parts of the agency interested in Lee Oswald? Yeah, whatever. Certainly those memos would have given a lie to what the CIA told the Warren Commission, which is, we didn't even know this guy. We didn't investigate him. We didn't look into it. So that would be one case where we could actually use documents to look for holes that are suspicious. Maybe they'll indicate a conspiracy to assassinate the president, but perhaps they indicate a conspiracy not to tell the truth to the Warren Commission, which would, anyway. Another example of that in looking for holes is, again, the Jeff Morley, Joannides, DRE case officer thing, where, Jeff Morley interviewed the head of the DRE, the student directorate, who came into contact with Lee Oswald in New Orleans. And we now know, for example, that the DRE really began propagandizing Lee Oswald. We know that the DRE actually wrote letters to Congress alerting Congress that Lee Oswald was illustrated the threat of Cuban subversion to recruiting innocent, naive American youth into the communist cause. They wrote letters like that. They sent out leaflets in Miami. They did a lot of propaganda work. And the head of the DRE goes, yeah, well, the CIA was paying us $50,000 a month to do that sort of propaganda. And of course, this was a really great deal for us. It's one of the biggest things that we were doing. Obviously, the DRE had to be reporting to their CIA case officers that they were doing that, right? Yet those files, the Joannides files, that should contain information on Lee Oswald are withheld. Now, why would you do that? The CIA would have been perfectly within its legal rights and its tasking and everything else to be working with the DRE to propagandize Lee Oswald. You might like it, you might not like it, but that's their job. So why is all the record of that missing from what's been released? And not only released, Morley has been into 3 federal courts. And in each instance, the CIA has walked into a judge in closed quarters of the judge and shown him something to persuade the judge not to release those documents. What the heck is in those documents?
I stand in the boat that Oswald didn't take a shot, but where I would draw the line for an agency like we were talking about earlier, defending its credibility in the eyes of the public, I would say that I think it's much like I mentioned to you, Larry, about like the 9/11 type thing. If you look at Oswald's background, the 201 file was, I think in 97, someone from a research department had requested to see Oswald's debrief or his 201 file, and the CIA sent a message back saying the file does not exist. Then 5 months later, there was a same letter from that same lady. I think I showed you this, Larry, which was an agent immensely had talked about giving a debrief with a guy with a background working in 1959 at a radio factory in Minsk. And the CIA sent a thing back saying, oh, we didn't actually classify that as a debrief. So they're not lying. They just didn't classify the document under a debrief. So it's kind of like how, if you look at the Warren Commission, there were 13 members. You know why there were 13 members and each one of them had an outstanding military career? Because they thought that the public's going to want an investigation of the president. You get a blue ribbon committee, everyone with extensive backgrounds, because their word is good. They obviously have a huge career, and that's what the Warren Commission was. But a lot of those commission members didn't even attend barely any of the full interviews that were recorded on the thing. But you look at the secondary committee, a whole team of young lawyers. It's why it's drafted like a legal document. When you're reading it, it sounds like legal speak, and it's kind of hard to understand. Now, what the Warren report was given to the general public does not match the 26 volumes that they have. There's a lot of data and a lot of stuff that contradicts the Warren report summary. But Alan Dulles' famous quote is, the public doesn't read, so you can just print it all anyway. Because independent scholars did the work and read the 26 volumes. The public just wanted a summary, brief cliff notes, man. And that's what they were given. And then all this documentation has been coming out for years. That's why it sounds like some type of grandiose conspiracy. I can show you so many prior events that are mentioned in the Kennedy assassination that have happened before or happened after that will completely get you to the level of conspiracy. But when it comes to Oswald's debrief file, I mean, there's a document that states Oswald asking the question, was he given LSD when he went over to Russia? Now, people immediately assume MK Ultra, and that is not where I go. I go, what did they give intelligence operatives when they went overseas? They tested LSD on them in case they were ever caught and interrogated. They would know what this LSD drug is. I go, whether that person, that's their opinion, you can take that at that value. Trust me, I don't consider that what I need to get you on the level of conspiracy, but I think it adds more weight to the intelligence and Oswald's connections to intelligence. Now, speaking with Blakey, I asked Blakey 6 times if Oswald was intelligence. He would say, yeah. The Warren Commission painted him out to be a loner, and we know by documentation now that that's not true. And people were saying, well, he was saying yes to your question, like Oswald was an intelligent person. And I go, yeah, but if I don't think so. I asked him 6 times. There's no way he was going to say yeah to that. And he even said it. The CIA did not kill JFK. And I said, that's not even what I'm asking. Did Oswald have intelligence connections? That's the question. Yes or no? And he gave me an answer. He said yes. So I think when you look at Oswald's background, the Warren Commission painted him out to be a loner, painted him out to be like this crazy lone nut person. Now, I can tell you, I went through Oswald's autopsy, and Larry, I think I mentioned this to you, and you said you haven't dug this far into it. There's a document that states Oswald tried to kill himself in Russia, tried to slice his wrist, and he was in the hospital for a couple of days. Now, Russia's medical system is better than ours, so it could be something like an attempt. And they could have had him in there for a prolonged period of time compared to what America would have. I mean, America now, if you have a baby and you give birth, they're basically you're sent out on the road the next day. What I did find in his autopsy reports is that the statements from Marina and the statements from Robert Oswald, stated that they saw no cuts on his wrists. Now, the autopsy report did mark some cuts on his wrist, but what they didn't mention is another document that I brought up with Blakey about Oswald receiving a gunshot wound in the line of duty. And that was not recorded in his autopsy report. There was no scarring from a couple of years earlier where he alleged got this gunshot wound in the line of duty. Now, what I would chalk that up to is not an idea that they're lying or that whatever. What I consider it is, look at the restrictions for what you would get sent home from war when it came to getting a gunshot wound. And Lee Harvey Oswald passed right before that restrictions. If you got hurt in the line of duty, you basically still stayed in there because they still needed people. So could he have lied and hurt himself in some small way that didn't leave a mark? Sure. And they could have written it down on a document and said, okay, kid, here's your papers, go home. Because a lot of people were trying to get out of war. That's not conspiracy. That's logical, critical thinking, I think, in my opinion. Now, the issue starts to become what?
Robbie, I can offer something new on that, I think, in regard. One, I happen to be writing an extensive monograph on Oswald.
That's why we're talking about
it. But one of the sources that I'm using is a fellow named Jack Swike, who was a Marine counterintelligence officer at Atsugi. He showed up about 6 months after Oswald had left. But the interesting thing is he had the opportunity to interview a lot of people who were there when Oswald was there. And one of the people he interviewed was the first NCO, the first non-com, who arrived, is like after Oswald did shoot himself, dropping the gun, whatever. And he told Jack he was absolutely convinced what had happened is Oswald had put in a request to stay in Japan. because he really liked it. He really liked socializing
He
with the
liked it too
Japanese.
much. He got a venereal disease.
Well, yeah, there are many reasons he liked it, absolutely. But he wanted to stay there.
He was
He
pumping for
actually
information.
put in the request, and he was about to get promoted to corporal. So things were looking pretty good with him. Then the request got turned down. The promotion didn't happen. And the NCO told Swike that he was absolutely convinced, looking at the wound or looking at where he'd shot himself, that it's just like you described. Oswald had now convinced himself he wanted out. He wanted out of the service. He was tired of it. He wanted out of Japan. That it was a bogus, self-inflicted wound. That was the non-com's idea. It was very superficial. This didn't happen by accident. And I think that's interesting because that's actually consistent with a lot of Oswald's behavior. Oswald was an intelligent person. He was a smart guy, and he manipulated things around him. When he wanted something to change, he just didn't sit back and let it happen forever. He would take action to try to make something happen. The same thing goes with what you just said in regard to the wounds, his wrist wounds. I think I recall pretty well that there was a lot of blood in the water, but the reason that they put him in the hospital and kept him was that he had a request in to stay in Russia, and the Russians didn't know what to do about it. The KGB didn't want him. There were factions that wanted him, that didn't want him, and one of the reasons he was kept in the hospital was simply to give them time to wrestle through what in the heck they were going to do with this crazy American, basically.
Well, do you know that explanation, both of those that you just gave about the gunshot wound and also the suicide attempt, completely basically did the opposite of what the Warren Commission did with those things. They used the dishonorable discharge to make him seem even more crazy and unstable and more like a communist threat. And then they used the suicide attempt to prove that he was insane and he was unstable to deal with. I mean, they capitalized on top of that with no explanation as to why, but people see that and they go, okay, obviously he was a lone nut. I had some guy tell me that during a conversation about Johnson, where he's telling me all the good stuff about Johnson, I'm biting my fucking tongue trying not to talk about the bad stuff that I know about him. But I mean, there's some things where I go, yeah, I think he's much like a Trump personality, someone that you wanted to deal with those big politics things if you were trying to pass a bill or something. But he mentioned, he goes, well, I friends with Max Holland, and I think Oswald did do it. He did it for the fame. And I go, then why in his interviews did he state, I'm just a patsy? It doesn't sound like someone that wants to do it for the fame. And also he wasn't being charged for killing Kennedy. He was being charged for killing a cop. Hence all the people at the TSBD that talked about they didn't know Oswald, even though he had been working there for a full month before the assassination even happened. They talked about they didn't know him because who the hell wants to be associated with a cop killer? That's like, I mean, some of the employee members of the TSBD were black. They didn't want to give a testimony. I don't know Oswald. I think those are reasonable conclusions. You can start kind of pinning this a little bit together of like, why is there so many people that were either cherry picked by the Warren Commission, or how many people should have gave a statement but didn't give a statement? The issue then starts to become, as if you look at the FBI. I mean, I talked to Craig Saccone. He did the whole Dealey Plaza witness map. And he talked about how many of the FBI agents interviewed someone briefly and then went on to the next person. I mean, that could all be chalked up to maybe they thought someone was going to come in behind them and do a more thorough investigation than the people that just wrote down the notes. But the issue starts to be is if you Google Lee Harvey Oswald right now on the Wikipedia page, you scroll down to Oswald's prior insanity, whatever you want to call it. And I think I sent this to you, Campbell, recently about Agent Hosty. So Oswald goes to an FBI police department because Hosty's stalking his wife, and he talks about threatening to blow up the whole police station. And then it says, period. And then it says, well, accounts vary if he threatened to blow up the police station or report it to higher authorities. I'm sorry, but vary? This isn't Diet Coke and Coke. This is fucking alcohol and fucking water. This is two different things, man. And then even says, Hosty even said that it was about reporting it to the higher authorities. Well, where's the note? Well, Hosty destroyed it on higher orders from his police captain or the FBI captain or something like that. Now, Is that conspiracy that they're all in some grandmaster plot? No. What it is they had the guy 3 weeks before make a death threat and didn't alert the Secret Service about it. So, of course, they destroyed the evidence to make sure it didn't embarrass the fucking agency. Again, embarrassing the agency. That's a more logical conclusion than some type of grand conspiracy. The thing is, Oswald got a job at the TSBD on October 18th. Apparently, Ruth Payne gave him the interview. His second daughter was born on October 20th. Kennedy's route wasn't published in the newspaper until the 17th to the 19th of November. So Oswald was there a whole month before Kennedy was even supposed to be arriving in Dallas. Now, there are statements from Marina, who eventually switched her opinion later, but talked about how Oswald was talking about killing JFK. Okay, if he was going to kill JFK, he had 5 days to prepare, right? He could have just picked a better spot than a low window, literally kind of like a foot off the ground in a kind of a shitty angle where Bill Hicks has a joke about it, talking about they put glass up to it so a bunch of Americans didn't look over the edge and go, no fucking way. That's real. But he could have picked a different window. He could have picked, I think it was the the northeast corner or something like that. There's another one that was right next to the staircase that he eventually ran down, where he was caught on the second floor drinking a Coke. So he ran down, what, 4 flights of stairs, 5 flights of stairs, which 1, 2, I think, yeah, 4 flights of stairs, and was completely fine, not flustered in the face at all, and perfectly still holding a Coke while someone pointed a gun at him when he turned around a corner, and he didn't make a flinch. He didn't do anything. He was kind of taken back. That's suspicious in its own. But then why would you only take 4 shots? Or why would you only carry 4 bullets to the assassination? I mean, 3 shots were found on the floor. 1 shot was found reloaded in the rifle. If you just saw Kennedy's fucking head explode like we all saw in the Zapruder film, why the hell would you reload your gun? And then why would you go back to your boarding house or take a bus and a cab and all this other BS that I hear about and then end up in a theater? I mean, did you know that the cops let Oswald leave the TSBD? Because nobody knew it was him. They let him leave. He said, can I go home? Because obviously something's going on and whatever. And then he goes back to his boarding house, grabs a revolver, then gets caught in a theater. I mean, there's a lot of things that are suspicious. Why didn't he just go to his house or stay hidden? But he went to a theater and they knew exactly where he was at.
Well, you're talking about the Warren Commission. Like I'm working out of Volume 7, which really goes into, and one of the things their summary says is that Lee Oswald stated that he wanted to be remembered by history. Nowhere ever has anybody ever come up with a source for that statement that's in the Warren Commission. But my thought has always been, well, man, if he really thought that way, the least he could have done is leave a note, like in the window. I was here. I shot the president. Something. If you want to be remembered, what famous martyr has ever done this and not registered? This is mine. I did this. Okay, not very good if you don't claim it. But I think more to the point, though, something that doesn't get talked about a lot is that we actually have evidence that Lee Oswald was looking for a job elsewhere at the time of the assassination and had been, and had actually applied for a job. We have his application papers. He wasn't tied to the TSBD. He had become bored with that job, just like every other job that he had ever had, and he was always already looking for work elsewhere. Which kind of goes like, well, if I'm devoted to being in this building during, for the president's arrival and everything, why am I looking for jobs elsewhere? There are a lot of details like that.
Well, and just from the outside, broadly, I would like to just state how I interpret what you said there, Robbie, because I understand the chain of reasoning that you're going through, and maybe there'd be some value to just sort of expressing my thoughts on it. I am a legal firearms owner. I own rifles very similar to the Carcano he was using, standard, World War II issues, Italian. I have the Canadians, Lee Enfield, very similar rifle, slightly higher caliber, 7.62 instead of 6.5, I think, for the Carcano. Anyway, you can see photos out of the 6th floor window. I was surprised to see Robbie actually was looking just the other day, or maybe it was even last night. I'd never bothered to look until we had that discussion briefly. Like looking out the window at that street with like, I was surprised that the street is a straightaway, directly curves away from the building. And I can say that I could make that shot. Okay. Like it's not insane. So to me, when I'm looking at that, that was my thought. Like, it's not crazy. The sixth floor straight away like that with a military issue bolt action like that, like you could make it happen. And he missed the first shot and then adjusted the scope, right? So, I mean, allegedly.
Originally, the first investigation talked about that there were 3 shots fired at Kennedy and all of them hit Kennedy. Or all of them landed inside Kennedy's vehicle. Then James Tague comes out of nowhere and talks about how a bullet had hit the cement and bounced and hit him in the cheek, where now that third bullet happened to be the one that misses and hits that curb and hits James Tague. So now instead of turning the investigation from 3 bullets hitting Kennedy, it's now 2 bullets. So when you look at how they replicated it as well, too, they tried recreating it and none of it matched exactly what happened. Now I can chalk that up to like the bullet that the 2 that collided into each other, a rare occurrence with bullets. Sure. But I mean, Oswald, this idea of Oswald being a great shot, from what I've seen, he wasn't a great shot. I'm pretty sure someone made a statement that if they were going to be in a firing line, they would want Oswald to be the one that was shooting the rifle. And if you look at the sound of the guns, the guys from Johnson's Gun Incorporated talked about that there's no way that you can reload the Mannlicher Carcano that fast in the record time that in the time that they said he did. And the shots literally go bang, bang, bang. It's a bolt action. You would have to reload it. There's no way. And that's why at least people either suspect at least up to 4 shots. And even the HSCA, I think, said 5 shots, but it's on the basis of acoustic evidence that's been debunked by both. But Larry, if you got something to say before I show something.
Well, I guess Campbell is, and I've done a bit of shooting myself, but
I've shot guns too.
yeah, I guess. Do you really feel that you could work the bolt action quickly enough? My problem in conceiving doing it is I'd have to be using the iron sights, not the scope, because my eye's going to come off. Every time I work that bolt, my eye's coming off that scope and I'm going to have to reacquire it. And reacquiring it in a rifle scope against a moving object. I'm like, I don't know deer hunters who do that. They take a shot. And they don't take 3 shots and reacquire the deer while it's moving and make the kill. Do you really? I have a problem in my own mind seeing myself being able to reacquire the target in a scope. So that kind of takes me back to the iron sights, which are kind of problematic. But more, I have the problem of actually working the bolt action and feeding in the round and reacquiring my target period all within 6 seconds.
And if we use the
I
prior
dropped the
assassination,
rifle. I don't know what I can say. It just seems clumsy to do it that quickly. So
the prior
that's my only
assassination plot they were blaming him on for killing General Walker, and General Walker was sitting at his desk in his house and he missed. He missed the shot and it went right into the wall. And even RFK did that investigation and said that it wasn't, that he's using it as political propaganda, because once Oswald was named for killing JFK, like whatever it is, after he's dead, I guess, after his interrogation and all that, and he gets shot by Jack Ruby, when Oswald's name came out, General Walker was like, oh, Oswald tried to kill me a couple months before. And RFK was like, no, he's using it because if they thought Oswald killed Kennedy, Walker was hardcore right wing. So what's the motive there? Is it he's just nuts, just killing everybody? He's killing a hardcore right wing and then he's killing a liberal like JFK? And RFK is like, no, he's using it for political propaganda. He thinks if people see, oh, he tried to kill Kennedy, then tried to kill me before, then obviously you should vote for me, because it's something stupid like that. But Walker said a lot of nonsensical stuff. But even look at what the Warren Commission, the witnesses that saw the Walker shooting talked about 2 people. Well, that doesn't fit a lone nutter as all either. Now, Marina's testimony is a lot that fueled this Warren Commission. What you have to know about Marina is that it's either you throw your dead husband under the bus or you're going to lose your kids, because they were threatening her with deportation. And that's a document that does come from Hoover. Now, Hoover did say you don't actually do it. You just threaten, leverage the deportation aspect to it. So she had to. She got a bunch of money from it. She ended up switching her opinion later. But even if she went to the conspiracy side later, you can't accept her testimony because she lied in the beginning. It wouldn't be fair to, the argument if we accept her when she was pro Warren Commission, but then we reject her when she's not, or we accept her when she's conspiracy, and then it's just not fair. You just got to toss it out. But what does make sense is when I talk to Posner. The HSCA, like I said, exposed a lot of good stuff. The Warren Commission said that Marina Oswald was able to identify Lee Harvey's rifle. That's how they were able to say that this was Lee's rifle. He took the shot, all this type of stuff. The House Select Committee on Assassinations, when they interrogated her in court, she didn't know the difference between a rifle and a shotgun. They go, you don't know the difference between a rifle and a shotgun? She goes, what is it, the ammunition? They go, no. And he goes, did you ever, and the Warren Commission said this, that he would reload it on his back porch, and Marina would hear him reload his gun on the back porch and practice all this. The HSCA asked her, and she goes, I didn't care what he was doing with that rifle. Because they beat each other, him and her. They beat each other back and forth. They was the most dysfunctional relationship. Whenever Lee would pull out his rifle, she wouldn't give a shit what he was doing, and she would distance himself from him. So again, you're now proving false in the official investigation of the Warren Commission, which I'm saying was just a show. It was like a whitewash. It had to be Oswald because you couldn't let there be conspiracy. If there was more than one shooter, people were going to either suspect it was the mob, or people were going to suspect it's Russia, or people are going to suspect it's Cuba, and they couldn't let that happen. I mean, Katzenbach's memo, I think, gets taken out of context a lot, but when he says the public must be satisfied, I mean, it had to be Lee Harvey Oswald. There could be no other shot. I mean, if you look at the motorcade vehicle, there's a crack in the front windshield, which is safety glass, by the way. So you could say that could be a front shot, or it could be a bullet that bounced from his neck and a fragment went into the thing. I don't care what you say on that. But there's also a bullet above the rear view mirror that was dropped into the seat that John Orr had the FBI do an investigation in, and they considered their evidence inconclusive. But he said that the magic bullet would work if it hit one person. If it did it to Connolly, it can make all those wounds, not if it goes through two people. And I think when you start looking at like what is an investigation in the first place, I mean, for the longest time, they used blood splatter analysis and all this type of other, polygraph tests admissible in court until the Innocence Project exposed it in 2014. And I have a phone call from Hoover to Johnson where he was talking about Jack Ruby wants to go to Washington, D.C. to take a polygraph test. And Johnson said, do you trust it? And Hoover said, I don't trust those things a damn bit. He said that in 1963. That wasn't exposed until 2014. How many people were wrongly convicted on a polygraph test? How many people were just given that because it's medical lingo or it's science that nobody wants to question because the public doesn't know? You mentioned to me about x-rays. You told me that, well, the x-rays state this. Well, I'll show you this, man. I mean, this is a real document right here. It's gonna pop up in a second. Give my computer time. And so much for talking about the fucking alien topic. I had good shit.
I was going to say, what happened to the UFOs?
Yeah, screw it,
I thought the JFK is just like a black hole. It like you can't even come close to it and not be pulled in.
And it's similar to UFOs in that way. In the subjects that we've been touching on, I think it overlaps quite a bit, like in the sort of general descriptions of the intelligence community.
If you read this right here, JFK autopsy report, false medical technicians say, by Gene King. New York, May 26, Reuter, 2 U.S. Navy medical technicians who witnessed the autopsy of President John F. Kennedy said on Thursday that autopsy photographs and x-rays recently released by the government had been tampered with and falsified. Gerald Custer took x-rays of Kennedy's body at Bethesda Naval Hospital in Maryland after his assassination of November 22nd, 1963, told a Manhattan news conference that the x-rays are wrong. He said the released x-rays showed a black hole where the right side of Kennedy's face should be, indicating that a portion of the face had been destroyed. But he said there was no damage to his face and no part of his skull was missing on the forward part of his head. These are fake x-rays. Now, me showing you that, let me stop screen sharing real quick. We've all seen the Zapruder film. I see Kennedy's head pop clean off his, whatever. We all see it. Well, here's the Zapruder film for you. We're going to watch it real quick. I don't think we really need sound to it. So if we go, oh, wait, no, this isn't the actual Zapruder film. Hold on. Give me a second, gentlemen. I'm working.
I was going to say, I've seen it once or twice and that wasn't it.
It's the guy sitting in a chair. Yeah.
Now,
Robbie, and
I'll show you this.
Yeah.
Once it pops up. So here's the Zapruder film. I see Kennedy's face right here. That looks like and you mentioned a shot from behind, right? The whole like shot back of the head come out the front. If the entrance wound, whatever the entrance wound is, it's going to be a pierce straight through. And then whatever the exit wound is going to be a giant back explosion. Okay. Or it's going to be a giant explosion. Okay. So if he's shot from, hold on, I'm going to pause that real quick. So if he's shot from the back from the back, right back here, you see where my little cursor is right over this black spot, then that explosion matches. It matches that right there. But this is the part where people say Zapruder film's edited. What is this black patch? This black patch right here is what every other witness and what the guy who jumped on the back of the Secret Service vehicle, Clint Hill, talked about seeing, which was a giant hole in the back occipital bone part right here in the back of his head. It's what all of them sketched out, all the Parkland doctors, everyone did. Now, what I think is pretty fascinating, hold on, I'm gonna have to stop screen sharing again. When we talked about those x-rays being falsified, I don't know if you've ever seen, and for anybody listening that hasn't seen this before, I'm sorry, it's going to be graphic. So if you're not into, like all that, disgusting, whatever you want to call it stuff. Yeah, I would just, pause it or skip. Ahead 5 seconds, maybe.
what are you going to show us, Robbie? Well, you're freaking me out
show
here.
you Kennedy's autopsy.
Oh, okay. Well, whatever.
So here's Kennedy. No offense, but that doesn't match the fucking Zapruder film that I just saw, where his whole right side of his head is gone. Looked like his whole eyeball exploded out of his head. What it does show is when you look back here, now when they do a surgery on the brain, and just another thing that's, let's say, conspiratorial, but it's true. Nobody knows where Kennedy's fucking brain is. When they do this, they cut your scalp and they pull the scalp forward and they take the brain out. This right back here is what people talk about matching that description of everyone seeing a back explosion from his head. Now, I don't know about you, but that bullet hole, I don't know if it was the bullet hole in his throat, Larry. You might have to be able to speak on this a little bit, but if it was the shoulder one in the back or if it was the neck wound, saying those two connect, one of those wound only went into the tip of your finger. It didn't go all the way through. The reason why that neck wound looks big is because they tried to put a trach tube in it, because the two Parkland doctors who barely had any autopsy experience in general were told to start doing this. So they decided to open up that wound to throw a trach tube in.
They're trying to keep him alive for a while, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, technically you're not pronounced dead until you're dead. So, I mean, Jackie Kennedy had brain in her hand and handed it to the doctor, and the doctor's like, "Oh, thank you so much." And then he dropped it in a fucking wastebasket because it was like, what are we going to do with this? It's dead. But you see what I'm saying, where the Zapruder film does not match what this is now showing. And people even say in the Zapruder film, if you look at the Zapruder film, there's a kid in the background. He's behind his dad. And then in a split second, he's right beside his dad, like clapping. And that's where people say like shit's like, they say it's edited. There are some frames that are missing out of the Zapruder film. Now, what I will show, just to end on that note, because I could stop ranting, because I feel like anybody listening is like, Jesus Christ, is this right here. And this does come from Doug Horn, who Doug Horn did work for the, he worked for the AARB, right? Or was it the House Select Committee on Assassinations?
AARB.
Okay. His little one, which I think is important. Let me know when that pops up. Is it good?
Everyone knows that the Zapruder film is the preeminent assassination record that we have today. The weekend of the assassination, we now know the film had a very different chain of custody and very different history than we once thought. The Zapruder film had actually been in the custody of the CIA, not necessarily in the hands of Life magazine in Chicago, as we had been led to believe.
I was the duty officer that Saturday and Sunday. And I received the call, it was in the afternoon, from Mr. Lundahl to get a crew in, that the Secret Service was going to arrive sometime that evening with something that required some work at the center. I've never seen that film like the night that I looked at it.
Were the images sharp or a little bit fuzzy? Maybe?
No, they were sharp.
So what he meant by it was sharp is that if you look at the Zapruder film, exactly when Kennedy gets shot in the head, the frame before it is fine and crystal clear, and then the frame right when he gets that impact happens, it gets all fuzzy, and then it for like 3 or 4 or 5, 6 frames, whatever afterwards, as the car's going and Kennedy's head goes like that, it goes back to clear again. And then it's just Kennedy's head slumped over. So that's what he was talking about. And he was the one that was saying the CIA came to him, Secret Service, whoever, said that these photos, this film is going to need some work. It's why people think that it's edited. Now, I would stay agnostic on that because it's too much of a controversial subject. It's like the acoustic evidence. People believe it or they don't. Seems like both sides, the Warren Commission and the fucking conspiracy theorists, reject it. I don't think you need to get the public in on that. But I think when you start like showing all of this and kind of catching the general public in on what the hell's going on, I think from your perspective, I mean, as a public viewer, you start going, okay, it's obviously not a simple, clear cut Oswald did it. There's a lot of stuff that starts going on. And you start wondering who did it. The who has been the focus for everybody. And it's fucking pissing me off because you want the answers. Just get everybody to the discussion level. Right now, everybody's doing their own independent research, like they're trying to solve a fucking mystery book or something. And I go, just get the public in on the conversation, get another hearing with all the 60 years worth of documents that we have. They know the answer. There's not going to be a document that's going to tell you CIA killed JFK, Mafia killed JFK. You're not going to get that. What you are going to be able to get, though, is some answers on some things. Now, they probably destroyed a document or anything that would tell you who did it. But I'm pretty sure somebody probably knows the truth of it all. And I think eventually, I mean, that's why Marina was supposed to be subpoenaed into court and she refused to do that to be able to testify because she's done dealing with it too. I mean, fucking her life has probably been hell. A bunch of conspiracy theorists and other people telling her, your family's gonna all this. Her whole family name, and her family, even now, her kids and everything, has to still live with through all this. So God, I mean, I understand she wanted to be out of the public since '96, but I mean, does any of that make sense? Like, does that start sounding rational to you a little bit?
Well, honestly, Robbie, okay, so my take on it, there are interesting, legitimate questions. What Larry asked me there about taking the shots with the bolt action at that rate, that is interesting to me. And that's something that I find is worth like zooming in on, especially as somebody who has used bolt action rifles similar to that. It does make me think about it, and it's worthwhile considering that. And I don't know the answer to that. I don't remember exactly the details. The FBI was saying how many seconds between each shot, Larry? It was like 5 seconds, you said?
Total of 6, somewhere between 5 and 6.
Yeah, and that if I'm thinking about it, like you could, I can conceive of getting an intense adrenaline rush in those moments. And I could conceive of it being possible, but it is interesting that there are this sequence of unlikely, to varying degrees of unlikeliness, things occurring in a very short window. And that, I think, reasonably raises interesting questions about that. Like the magic bullet concept, I was intrigued by that when I sort of heard about it and looked into it. The detail of it being a military bolt action rifle and Lee Harvey Oswald using full metal jacket ammunition, to me, that was a major point, the full metal jacket, because I use that and I'm very familiar with how it works. It stays together. It's got the metal coating on the soft interior, and they have small entrance wounds, small exit wounds intentionally, and they do stay together and bounce around inside the bodies and stuff. So once again, very unlikely for that many impact points, but in my mind, it's conceivable. It's possible. And so it's like unlikely but possible, unlikely but possible. And then that's sort of how I process it, just to sort of give that framework. And I understand that ends up on the opposite side of sort of what people who have gotten into this deeply sort of conclude on in some cases. So, I'm open to alternatives. I'm not in favor of supporting the CIA in any respect. I'm not against them either. I'm curious about what's actually happening. So, like Robbie, for stuff like, I would say that the evidence to me from an outside perspective, just in terms of communications, it seems like that the idea of Lee Harvey Oswald being the shooter, to me, like, and it might not be true. I'm not saying I know for sure he did. Obviously, some people would say that they know for sure, like who are of similar psychology to me. I do not think that. But to hear someone say it wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald is off-putting because of, if nothing else, the amount of information required to support a claim of that magnitude, contrary to the public perspective. And there are huge numbers of things like that in history where that ultimately that unlikely event has been proven true. But this is sort of the theme that I have been sort of focusing in on, is the communications side of it, and how the way that we discuss these things can lead either to like improvements in our social situation, like criticizing the government and actually getting people on board with realizing that negative things can happen even when everybody has good intentions. Like that's very important in a functioning democratic society. So like maybe Robbie, like, do you have any thoughts on that? Like if the outcome of saying Lee Harvey Oswald didn't do it, and we can't prove that, but it, in my opinion, it seems more likely than not. If that turned people off, is it worth like you leading with that at all? If you can actually get to these things that will clue people into the actual, like the verified at this point things that are actually, I think, very significant.
I haven't admitted, or I haven't what is it? Admonished? What is it? What is it when someone's not guilty, but they haven't? I haven't said that Oswald didn't do it. I've just said that there's a lot of evidence to support that there's a lot more going on with the situation, and I haven't fully admonished his innocence or done anything. I think that's the word. That's admonished 100%. Pretty positive. Done the spelling bee a couple of times. But I haven't fully considered that he wasn't guilty in some part of things. I think people bring up reasonable points that he might have killed Tippit or any of those types of situations. But I think with the JFK thing, there's just a lot of things that don't make sense. I mean, allegedly they saw Lee Harvey Oswald in Mexico, but Hoover made a document stating that it was not Oswald in Mexico, but someone using his name. There was someone that went to go test drive a car. Oswald didn't have a license, so someone was using his name out of anything. There was someone that went to a firing range shooting other people's targets, saying that this is what he was going to do to the president, saying that his name was Lee Harvey Oswald. That does not fit the description of Oswald being this silent, doesn't talk to anybody type and kind of quiet, kept to himself. That does not fit that. So there's a lot of conflicting personalities. That's why it makes it so difficult to understand who Oswald is. Like I said,
what is important to remember is that Dino Brugioni, who we just saw in your clip there, right? Brugioni from the National Photo Interpretation Center. It's really important to understand what his hobby was and what he did mostly. Like he had the largest collection of UFO photographs known to man. Because I know you wanted to get back to UFOs.
Yeah, that's a good pivot point, perhaps.
I'm into the JFK thing now. I feel like it's a good discussion. I laugh because whenever I hear, like, I'm not laughing at you, Campbell, but when you said the rifle shot and you like that, it's the same thing I heard at my work when this guy talked about stocking Pepsis at the book depository building. And he goes, "Oh, you're interested in the assassination," back when I was first talked to Larry about it. And this was months ago. I know way more now. Before I was just like, I don't know what the hell's going on. But when I was talking about it, he goes, "I've been to the book depository building, used to stock Pepsis there." I was like, "Oh, really?" He goes, "Yeah, once you go up to that window, you can easily know that one guy could easily make all those shots." I'm like, what fucking evidence is that besides like your viewpoint of like, maybe I could take a shot, while the president's going through Dallas with like all these motorcycle cops around him and multiple vehicles following him and a whole crowd cheering and taking photographs. And, I mean, at least pick a better vantage point. You had 5 days to prepare, for God's sakes.
Robbie, would you be able to pull up a photo from that window, this Explorer there? I'd love to just sort of like people watching this in the future, just taking a look at the actual shot that was taken.
I might have to Google that.
Just
I could show you.
Honestly, like I hear what you're saying, and that's not the strongest argument I would make, saying that somebody did take the shot from that position.
The real argument I would make is if we look at the schematics that's in the National Archives, Kennedy's route could have went this way, and Kennedy's route went this, and then down this way. So it literally passes right by the Texas School Book Depository, and this was published on the 17th and 19th. And why I say I haven't admonished or I haven't totally pulled Oswald out of the scenario is because if Oswald did have intelligence connections, then if he was waiting for orders while working at the Texas School Book Depository, someone had his profile, someone like James Angleton or someone, whoever his handler could have been, could have known. I mean, look, he returned from Russia after saying that he was defecting to Russia and he was going to tear up his U.S. citizenship. On his way back, he only gets one interview for an hour with an FBI agent, but there's no press. There's no one freaking out about how this person just tried a commie, just tried to tear up his U.S. citizenship and he's coming back to States. He gets a job at the Texas School Book Depository. It's why they surveilled him. They had info on him for a long time, but they said they didn't do it. And then it came out later that they obviously were definitely spying on us, what The Intercept's writing about as well now too. Now, if they had the profile on Oswald that fit this false defector program or whatever people want to talk about him, then wouldn't it be easier just to have his route have Kennedy's route make this change and go right by the Texas School Book Depository? There are people that said that Oswald wasn't on the steps. I don't buy Prayer Man, but people say about it. Then there's also a witness statement that talked about the time that she was giving Oswald change for the Coke machine is when the shots rang out. She wasn't picked up by the Warren Commission and questioned. The investigation was Oswald did it, and we're going to show you how. It wasn't an investigation into the president's death like the public thought. The HSCA wasn't even that. The HSCA was limited by the CIA, but it was really just looking over the Warren Commission's work. So, I mean, even when I talked to Blakey, Stokes told him, keep these people's reputations as they were when they were alive. What about the dirt? What about the real truth to all that? What about the church committee looking through all the horrible stuff that the government and intelligence agencies were doing, where they showed a literal heart attack gun? A heart attack gun, dude. That's your intelligence agency. And good. I'm glad, because I'm sure other agencies out there in other countries are doing the same shit. I understand it. But the important part about this is like the idea that all this coming out and the government doing all this, they would have never got caught. I agree with that. The photo manipulation, they wouldn't have got caught. That's stupid. Government doesn't really make slip ups like that. But when the government does get exposed and people say, look how incompetent the government is, well, no one pays the price. No Secret Service members were fired for Kennedy losing his life in Dallas, even though they were drinking the night before and they shouldn't have been. Even in Florida, when there was a prior assassination plot, they managed to cover all those buildings, all those rooftops, and had them all checked. This route was published on the 17th, and they did not bother to check the rooftops or anything. And then you can believe Josiah Thompson, where he says that they found another rifle on the roof. And I don't even know. I've seen a photo, but I can't verify that. But I can verify that everyone that was there that saw the rifle called it an Italian, a 3.75 Mauser. And then somehow that rifle changed to a Manley Kirk Arcano. And I could say easily they could make a mistake, but also Roger Craig was 6 inches away from the rifle.
I think it's simpler than all this when you boil it down, in all honesty. If you have a letter that goes from the director of the FBI to Sullivan Sunday afternoon that says, I want you to write a report detailing how Lee Oswald did this as the sole assassin. We know that's true. We have a copy of the letter. Okay. Given that, nothing works after that point in time. You literally have to draw the line and say, we will not know. I mean, the director of the FBI, just at the orders of the president, I don't think there's any doubt of that, said, it's done. It's over. The only investigation that you can do, the only evidence that you can collect, the only material that we want is the material that shows Lee Oswald did this as a single individual. And the response to that, at which we have also, it's a document. The response is, this is going to be really difficult. I just say, at that point in time, give it up.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's done. There's
Yeah.
the whole body of evidence, everything that's going to follow from that point is going to be filtered.
That's an excellent point.
If
Larry, you know more than I do. I mean, am I making sense at all a little bit? I mean, I definitely know a lot more from our very first conversation about JFK.
Well, and that's what, no, you're the point is, and you're making it, the point is, if you have that starting point, you are going to find discrepancies all over the place, because everybody that's going to come along after the FBI, including the Warren Commission, who did not buy the FBI's shooting reconstruction. It's sort of like, wait a minute, the FBI did not use, the Warren Commission did not use the FBI's reconstruction of how the shooting occurred. Is this a problem? Obviously it's a problem. I'm just saying, you're right, Robbie. But we'd expect to find that, wouldn't we? I mean,
Are you-
if somebody
hold on.
tells you from the very beginning, I don't really want a criminal investigation, I want a report, that we're going to get to the prosecutor's office showing this guy is guilty, and you spend 50 years on it, are you going to find a lot of stuff they don't find? You bet you are.
Look, give me some credit. For 3 months, I consumed a lot of information. Come on now.
But I mean, I'm just going to say it will take that long
I
to
want to
come
hear you
out.
say those words. You say those dirty words. Say them. Say, Robbie, you did a good job.
Yeah.
You did great, Robbie. You did.
Ruffle my
that?
hair, Mr. Hanks.
Quick study, is that what's the right phrase for this? What do we want to use? Yes.
My teacher said I was never going to amount to nothing. No, but I look, I mean, there's reasonable things. I mean, look, the Warren Commission even said that Jack Ruby was not stalking Oswald. And we know by the midnight press conference release, there's Jack Ruby right there. And Jack Ruby came out later when the church committee, and I swear to God, when people say the church committee investigation that looked into the assassination, no, they didn't. No, they didn't. They mentioned it briefly, and all they talked about was Jack Ruby being an FBI informant. They did not do an investigation. They did not do a full conversation and breakdown on it in court. All they asked was, did anybody ask the question of Jack Ruby being an FBI informant? Jack Ruby is this guy right here in the black suit. This is a midnight press conference as an Oswald's an interrogation, and they bring up I think they called it what is it, the fair something for Cuba papers?
Oh, yeah. Fair play for Cuba, yeah.
Well, Jack Ruby said, actually, it's called the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. And everyone turns around and goes, that fucking Jack Ruby that just said that? Jack Ruby was also at Parkland Hospital when Kennedy was brought there. Seth Cantor saw him there and said, what the hell is Jack Ruby doing here? Now, you could say he was just a nosy guy. This is fucking weird that a strip club owner is put on glasses and decides to sit there and take notes. Was he stalking Oswald? The Warren Commission said no. But the Warren Commission also stated that Jack Ruby didn't know any officers. Well, that's a lie, because the police officers hung out at Jack Ruby's club. Jack Ruby knew a lot of them. When Jack Ruby shoots Oswald, the main guy says, Jack, you son of a bitch. He's on a first name basis with the guy. I mean, obviously he knew him, but again, respecting the credentials of the department. Dallas police, whatever it was, keeping their reputations, they didn't know the strip club owner. I mean, makes a lot of sense. It doesn't have to be some overall grand conspiracy thing. Now, the issue becomes with the investigation and why people think Johnson did it is because right after Kennedy gets shot and he heads into Parkland, this is while Kennedy is in Parkland Hospital. They're washing out the fucking limousine. There's a bucket right there. They're picking brain matter, doing all this type of stuff. And then the guy, what is it, Stringer, the one that took the autopsy photographs and everything like that, there's a perfectly preserved brain that was there at Bethesda Medical Center. And the brain, this is obviously from Gary Aguilar and other members of that have looked into the more of the medical evidence, talked about how his brain weighed, was it slightly above average? That doesn't make sense. I don't know about you, but I just saw Kennedy's whole right side of his head get hit. I would think that you would have less brain, not more of it, right? It didn't make sense. I mean, why was it perfectly preserved? And then they go, why was they at Bethesda Medical Center? Did they have live cadavers there? Did they possibly get another person's brain? But we don't know where the brain is. That's another question you can bring up. And I think a lot of these things, like, it doesn't even need to be Oswald's innocence. It could just be on the basis of, like, there wasn't an investigation into Kennedy. The history books are teaching a fucking sham that is to pin Oswald for the blame for everything. And it doesn't even need to be admonishing his guilt. But Jack Ruby running guns in Cuba. Jack Ruby visited Santos Traficante when Castro locked him up in prison. And that's from interviews I've done with people who have done books on Traficante, who don't think Traficante killed Jack Ruby. Now, they do think that there was suspicious with Roselli, Johnny Roselli and Sam Giancana and Roselli and Traficante were all these mob figures that were hired to assassinate Castro. They were working with the CIA, delivering poison pills, poison cigars, explosive cigars, exploding seashell, all this type of stuff. And Sidney Gottlieb, in charge of the MK Ultra project, was also one of those names that was listed on the people that tried the assassination attempts on Castro, putting a poison powder in his beard to make, or in his cream for his beard to make his beard fall out. It's a character assassination. Lose the respect of your people when you don't have that big, powerful beard. That's not a mob assassination attempt. That's a fucking government attempt. poison pills is a government attempt. The mob just goes up, gets a guy beside you and wants to blow you away. But the issue becomes with that is Trafficante might have been a double agent, which I put a little bit of weight into. I think if Trafficante looked from a business standpoint, if he could have all the mob kicked out of Cuba and Trafficante's mob or his family could just run the casinos down there, then all the businesses to himself. But also Castro put Trafficante in jail. And if the mob's not going to forgive you for that. None of those mob figures. I mean, the fact that Roselli gave some crucial information or gave an interview or something like that, everyone was looking at Roselli like a rat. And that's why you end up finding him chopped up in a barrel. So I'm just saying the CIA doesn't chop up people in a barrel, but Giancana was shot to death in his apartment. So, I mean, that could be the CIA. I don't know.
Well, I think there are some commonalities we could touch base on with respect to these government investigations. And there's an important distinction between public facing commissions and reports and secret internal commissions and reports. And so when the government is putting together a public facing report, it is expected, or even as Larry sort of suggested in other respects related to investigative agencies, there's a necessity, a legal obligation to consider propaganda and influence strategy and things like that, and how foreign governments might use this information. And my vague understanding of the fears surrounding the Kennedy assassination related to fears of nuclear war occurring. And so, like, broadly speaking, I think that the ideas that you at least from my perspective might have to confront actively are that nebulous sense that it would be expected for these people to, in that circumstance, be not ethically but trying to suppress the fact that they were watching him, and then they slipped up would be maybe a more like, in some, like a mainstream view, more likely, right? So that's the kind of sort of broad thing that is going on here. And the similarity to the UFO subject on this one thing, I mean, obviously, Larry, you're very familiar with this, but Blue Book was going on for a couple decades. U.S. Air Force's investigation of UFOs. They then wanted to wrap it up, hired University of Colorado to do a study. It ended up being shorthand the Condon report, because the lead scientist on it was Edward Condon. After that came out years later, that we have verification that Condon was communicating with the U.S. Air Force, and before it was even started, they told him what the conclusion should be. So this is a standard operating procedure with these public facing reports. And then you have to get into why are they doing that? And oftentimes it's a nebulous sense of, national security interests. And then you get into how they're communicating those interests to the public and how they're sort of weighing those things. And so with UFOs, it's always been like, UFOs are not a national security threat. And we've touched on this side of things, how they use this language stuff. It's like 1984 things, right? Like MI6, James Bond, military intelligence 6, that became defense intelligence. The words matter. And that's George Orwell was working military intelligence. You change it to defense because people like that more. So when you have things like these vague statements from the government, like UFOs are not a threat or something, they're saying UFOs are real, not real. So they keep their plausible deniability. But the baseline thing I'm trying to get at is that there is this inevitable sense that the government will be lying like this. And the challenge is maybe communicating why the sort of expectation of that would be something a little bit more nefarious than what would sort of be typically expected, which is like more of this like broad national security plus incompetence. With respect to JFK, would you, Larry or Robbie, agree that it's plausible, maybe not the most likely from your perspective, but it's all positive, possible alternative explanation that it was just a collection of people screwing up in their respective agencies, not following up with having watched him and stuff? Like, is that a reasonable possibility, or is that sort of based on what you've seen sort of outside of the realm of possibility at this point?
Could be. I mean, I've said that before too. I still think that's it could be whatever they consider documents they're keeping for national security issues. I mean, they could have used Oswald for something in another country and part of the false defector YouTube program or whatever the hell he was involved in throughout his military career for that brief amount of time. Or, I don't know. I mean, the issue starts to become is the theater thing again. In his pocket, he had half a movie ticket in there. Now, around this time, theaters, I mean, it was a place where spies meet. You would sit down with this half movie ticket next to someone and you'd hold it up and someone would either complete the piece or they'd look at you like you're fucking nuts. So could that be a possibility? Sure. I mean, I think it's weird that his gun didn't work after he just shot a cop. His gun didn't work at the theater. And then I don't think Oswald was supposed to leave that theater alive, to be 100% honest with you. I mean, I trust Bart Camp's work when, they first patted him down, nothing on him. And then the second time they patted him down, they found 6 revolver bullets and a bus pass on him. I think that's pretty suspicious. So either one, they didn't pat him down correctly, or they're lying about the pat down. But I mean, even when they find the wallet at the scene, the wallet with the AJ Heidel ID in it, I mean, none of those people, when they gave a statement in court about it, talked about a wallet or any of that type of stuff. But you could see them clearly around with the media, showing the media, look, we just found the wallet. We found the AJ Heidel. It's like a show. And I'm just like, well, I guess that's what we need as people. We need a show. And the Warren Commission was a show. I think even Earl Warren was the one that didn't want to be on the commission, but Johnson already signed him up for it. But the commission was named after him because of his respect and everything like that. So, I mean, Alan Dulles was fired by Kennedy and then hired to investigate Kennedy's death. And Alan Dulles was in charge of MK Ultra. But that's also top secret. I doubt he knew everything that was going on in MK Ultra. But Joyanne West visited Ruby. Out of all the 4 or 5 psychiatrists that saw Ruby, Joyanne West was the only one to administer him a flu shot for walking pneumonia. Now, afterwards, Jack Ruby's having horrible visions of Jews burning in a street, and he had a vision of his brother being legless. Like a bunch of crazy shit going on. Jack Ruby stated in his testimony, they gave me cancer. I can't prove that they gave him cancer. I have no document to show what was in that flu shot that was administered to him. I could show you a year before where they were injecting live cancer cells at an Ohio penitentiary into prisoners. So that's real, injecting cancer cells into people. But I can't prove that they gave him cancer. I can't prove that they gave him LSD. What I can show you is they gave him 126 fucking x-rays in a matter of 2 weeks with 1967 radiology equipment. I don't care who you are. That's going to give you some type of illness, radiation poisoning. I don't care what it is. And I mean, his autopsy said that he died from like a blood clot that went from his leg up to his lung or something like that. And then his secondary cause of death was the carcinoma thing with the cancer. So, I mean, I think I'm trying to be as rational as possible and go as deep as I possibly can to try. And I mean, Oswald, for instance, backyard photograph, was it manipulated? I don't know. I stay agnostic on it. I say his jaw looking bigger in the photo. I know people say Roscoe White. I know Larry doesn't believe that. But I even went into his dental records. They said that he had perfect teeth, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense because he was missing a tooth in some of those photos. But here's my conspiracy. You guys ready? This is my own little thought process. Get ready for it. So where did they test out fair play for Cuba committee? A lot of those things were littered across college campuses. They were like CIA kind of fronts in a sense. So they had fair play for Vietnam. They had all that. Now we know in the church committee, they exposed that CIA has been effectively active on college campuses. I've done plenty of episodes on their influence on college campuses. Maybe they picked up Oswald out of school or whatever and did that. I know a lot of people say they groomed him, but I don't think they necessarily groomed him from birth. I think they found him at a young age, maybe even, I don't know, right around the time he's enlisting into the military, and they had some plans for him. And I mean, he had security clearance for I think 2 weeks, and then it was just gone. But nobody knows what the clearance was exactly for.
And I guess I'm trying to respond to I'm trying to respond to Campbell's thing, and then the problem is that
I'm sorry.
No. I think the real question you're asking yourself is how much of the discontinuity, how many of the discontinuities, how much of the disconnect, how much of the noise, let's call it noise, stuff that does not make sense. Okay, it just doesn't make sense. how much of the noise has to do with the fact that, you know, does it all have to do with the fact that there were some things about Lee Oswald and his association or his connection or his use by
It was all a
intelligence
conspiracy
agencies?
from Trump.
Well,
Trump orchestrated the plot. I know he did it. I don't know.
or was it Trust's father? Oh, wait a minute. Okay.
The public would accept it if you said Trump did it. Everyone would be like, all right. And then you could talk about it like, fuck.
And then it's in his tax returns. But okay. So I think the question really is all this noise simply an artifact of various federal agencies or even various individuals covering up things that they had done with or around or in some operational use of Lee Oswald, and they're just running all over the place trying to distance themselves from that. So is it all just distancing? And Lee Oswald did it, and it would have been totally clear if they didn't have to screw around and cover up what they had been doing. I mean, is the cover up really all about what they had been doing in conjunction with Lee Oswald and not about the assassination? And so, Campbell, I think the answer to that is no, it can't be that simple, because there are things about the medical evidence, there are things about the ballistics evidence, there are things about the crime scene that have nothing to do with Lee Oswald or any relationship with the intelligence community that suggest that the shooting was more complex than just one individual. So that's where I would draw my line is, it is all the noise having to do just with Lee Oswald and the agencies. A lot of it is, but that's not going to explain everything. The extent. Let's put it this way. Again, trying to boil it down. If it was that, we know the most recent document releases prove once again, because we have the document that shows that the CIA lied to the Warren Commission, and that the CIA did, out of the JM Wave station, do an exhaustive investigation of whether Cuban exiles or pro or anti-Castro Cubans had been involved in killing the president. They did that investigation, they compiled all the information, and then they buried it. We don't know where they buried it. We know they did it. And then they lied to the Warren Commission saying, oh no, we never even had a thought of investigating that. So, we know that sort of lying occurred, but does that relate to the fact that there needed to be 3 autopsy reports written in regard to the actual injuries to the president? Does that, no, it doesn't. So there's a fine line to be drawn between the killing of the president and all this other stuff. So somebody had to, I'm convinced that somebody had to deal with the fact that the medical evidence and the shooting evidence suggest more than one shooter. Bottom line. And they had to replace x-rays. They had to, you talked about Brugioni. Okay. One solid sell for this is that after Brugioni, after they did the frames and the storyboards to show from the Zapruder film to illustrate the shooting, they took that set of storyboards and they went and briefed the CIA director and the National Security Council. Okay, we know they did that. Again, that's on record. However, Brugioni will tell you that those are the storyboards he was involved in. That was on Saturday. On Sunday, they came back. Brugioni was not called in, specifically kept out of the fact that they did another set of storyboards from the film, and that those storyboards are what went into the official record. Now, how could you possibly explain that without saying the story had to change? I don't need another set of storyboards. If you're in marketing, it's like, do I need another PowerPoint? Yeah, because first PowerPoint didn't work. Okay, I need another PowerPoint. Okay, and the really strange thing is that during the House Select Committee investigations, and we have documents on this too, somebody actually found that first set of storyboards that somebody had stowed away in a closet back at the National Photo Interpretation Center. And they wrote a memo to their boss saying, well, we know that the select committee is, collecting documents and all. Should we send this to them? And the response was, no, burn them, destroy them now. We were never supposed to have kept those. These are not official records. Do away with them. Now, that doesn't relate to anything having to do with Lee Oswald as an intelligence asset. There's something about the shooting that stands alone. So that would be my point.
I would even raise the thing about the organized crime angle. I mean, a lot of people have said the mafia did it. Well, the mafia could take a shot, but I mean, they couldn't do the cover up of the medical and all that other stuff that had to come from higher above. And this doesn't need to be an orchestrated plot from the government to do that. It just needs to be a couple of top head officials given a couple of orders, and people will be more than happy to follow them because their job is at risk.
But Bethesda does not happen. What we know occurred at Bethesda and in PIC does not happen without the president. It's hard to picture anybody taking orders. I mean, you're talking about the chief medical officer and admiral at Bethesda, who has the guts when the president's doctor shows up and says, we don't want a full autopsy. I've been told we don't want a full autopsy. We just want the bullets. When the admiral says, no, I mean, this is one admiral talking to another admiral saying, no, that's not the way we do things around here. We will do a full autopsy. So what is going to, if admirals are talking to each other that way, what is going to override that? No, that's not the mafia, Robbie. You're absolutely right. That's not the mafia. That's not the CIA. That's got to be at the highest level of the National Security Council and the president. You don't change that admiral's mind. That admiral is just so we go by the book here. Well, no, we don't, unless somebody gives me an order that I have to obey.
Well, I appreciate your presentation, Larry, and I do connect with a lot of what you said. And
Jesus Christ, I pulled up a bunch of stuff. Where's my presentation compliment? Holy shit.
I didn't even have any screen shares to do, Robbie. See, look at that.
Well, Robbie, what I like just from an outside is, and it doesn't mean that it's necessary to do this, but sticking to the contents of the documents largely is compelling to me. And the reason in part is that my perspective on how to communicate this stuff is shaped by my interactions with fellow skeptics. Now, I have been on sort of the boundary of the skeptic community in some ways because I do push active consideration rather than the debunking angle, which is the popular angle these days. I like to actively investigate. I find that more rewarding and interesting. A lot of skeptics think that that sort of like caters to conspiracy and whatever you want to call it, fantasy, whatever. That's certainly a risk, but there's the other side of it where very unusual things would be left by the wayside if we didn't investigate these things. And like how much government wrong behavior would be left untouched. Like it is necessary to be leaning into investigating these inconsistencies on these very important things. And I just want to say what your chain of reasoning there, Larry, is compelling in the sense that each time there is a document drop on this subject, there is more verifiable information that shows that something that a major institution that we're supposed to trust and respect has been lying for a long time to the public. And they aren't providing the explanation that is coherent as to why. And that is very similar to the UFO subject, where they are not explaining things in a way that, according to propaganda strategy, if you were studying it at a postdoctoral level, it's not consistent with what you should be doing. And that is where it's like the digging into it is so, interesting to me. And I'll just finish this little point by pointing out something that supports what you were saying, Larry, that the UK Ministry of Defense on the subject of UFOs refuses to comment, and they say UFOs do not pose a risk to national security, the classic line. But similarly, we have in our hands a declassified internal report from the Ministry of Defense called UAP in the UK Air Defense Region from 2000. That report was, we know from reporting by BBC News and The Guardian and Wired, distributed to top levels of UK leadership. They were briefed on it. It was extremely secretive and was only forced to be released through updated Freedom of Information laws in 2006. And they did not want to release it. It was fought in the system and it was forced to be released. That report says that UAP exists is indisputable. And then they define UAP as credited with the ability to hover, take off, land, multiple lights. They can accelerate instantaneously, and they can clearly outmaneuver any known aircraft or missile, manned or unmanned. So they define UAP as the objects that we all know people are reporting with the extraordinary characteristics, and it's indisputable that they exist. And then they say they're almost certain that they're like some kind of new atmospheric plasma thing. That's not verified in science right now at all. It's just what they say they're almost certain it is. But that report verifies so many conspiracies in the UFO community and renders them true factually. We have verification that the Ministry of Defense top leadership was briefed that UFOs indisputably are real with those features, and that they're still saying UFOs are not a threat. So there are a lot of reasons to think that something like this, it could be flipped on its head entirely by the next drop. So I do respect and support your investigation of this subject.
It's an interesting concept, and that they don't handle these things well. They really don't. Maybe Robbie's pointed out, at least the CIA had a strategy for dealing with objections to the Warren report. You know, like we've got a strategy, we've got a program. You know, there's no sign. Well, I guess the Robertson panel actually is the closest we come up to it in UFOs, where the Robertson panel actually generated a psychological warfare strategy that involved Disney and other. I mean, but since then, you know, certainly DOD right at the moment has no strategy for dealing with this. Their only strategy seems to be, well, we'll have a press conference, we'll show a few funky slides, and we'll say, yeah, there are other cases that are totally, you know, that totally they're not drones or whatever, but we're not talking about those. That's our strategy. This is not a viable, nobody's going to recommend that as a viable strategy to reduce fear and concern over UFOs. So
that's exactly what draws my interest from sort of a mainstream perspective is, why does the government communicate so terribly on these things? And it really does beg like an answer, and they aren't providing an answer, which is inconsistent with how they should be communicating to the public, keeping everyone not thinking about this, which they, according to their own internal reports, like they put UFO culture on slides alongside domestic terrorists because they identify the risk that foreign actors can pose to in manipulating that community, and as a fifth column in the domestic United States. So for them, like Obama to be stepping forward and like in 2021 sort of encouraging people like, oh yeah, there might be actually UFOs up there and stuff like that. It's like, and then John Brennan, former CIA director, obviously we don't have to believe everything he says, certainly, but he then is on a podcast also saying like, some of these things might be some kind of thing that some people might say constitutes a different form of life. And it's like, but the CIA is producing reports saying that you don't want people to think about UFOs. So what the heck is that, right? And it defies logic to me. Then so there is reason to think about it. Like,
I love the most recent comment from the DOD. It's sort of like, we have found no evidence of aliens. And my immediate response is, if you had, would you tell us?
Yeah, would they be legally obligated to not tell us, right?
Well, would I expect you to say that? Oh yeah, everything that you've done in the last 50 years makes me comfortable that you would tell us if you found them. Sure, yeah.
Yeah, no way, right? Yeah.
I'm upset we moved right off of the JFK topic and went right to the UFO shit. Damn it.
I mean, apparently it's sort of I don't know if you can fully separate out these criticism elements.
I want to point this out before we get fully into the UFO thing, because I do have UFO stuff I still wanted to pull up. This is from the 2022 release. I just say this is weird, and this is in the National Archives. It was in the document dump that they had. Of course, it's redacted, but it says assassination of President John Fitzgerald, Dallas, Texas, November 22nd, 1963. Blank stated that the following information began coming back to her earlier this year and credits her lapse of memory to a drug-induced amnesia administered to her on an order of a Central Intelligence Agency employee. During the week of March 21st, 1961, after returning from lunch, she overheard a conversation and possibly employees of the Central Intelligence Agency, which took place in the Central Intelligence Agency office located on the second floor. Blank stated that she does not recall who was talking, but that the conversation concerned the fact that the president was not doing what was good for the country, especially about Vietnam, and that he had to be done away with the next 5 years. She stated the following remark: the group noticed that she had returned and the conversation was terminated. Blank stated that the following Friday she was given U.S. Army orders by Blank, the personal officer, to travel to an unrecalled Army medical facility for a polio inoculation. She stated that upon arriving at the medical facility, she was injected with some type of drug, which the medical technician later told her was a drug that would make her forget everything. Blank stated that she now recalls that the technician told her that she would not even forget getting the shot, and that upon returning to her office, she was questioned about the injection, and she remembers that she told him that apparently she had received a polio inoculation, but did not recall the time of receiving it. That's in the 22 release. I think that's fucking weird. Doesn't fit any of that Mary's monkey shit out there that Judith Baker's talking about all this. I don't know. There's a bunch of weird stuff with like shots and MK Ultra, baby. But that's in the 2022 release. I just saw that. I thought that was interesting. But even before they released the documents, I was talking about JM Wave being a lot of documents that they're probably withholding. And like there's like 8 different, or not 8 different pages, like 20 different pages that are all JFK or JM Wave documents, which I was like, oh shit. Look at that. Robbie was right about something.
Do you see the cover on that, Robbie? Is that whose agency generated that? Is that FBI?
I don't see FBI listed on the top here. It just
I'm
says
just
BA.
curious why that would show up now after all these years. I mean, there's been so much, I won't say equally silly, but I mean, I can show you another set of stuff that looks very much like that's been around for decades. You know, I'm just kind of like, why did this not show up?
Well, look at the 22
earlier?
look at the 22 release. Half of that stuff, there was a letter that people were publishing talking about Oswald taking a Bible from like a hotel room. That shit came out in 2017, but it was all in Spanish. I translated it and through Google Translate and then showed it on air on here. And everyone's like, oh, we got the cover letter. We get to know who sent the. I'm like, who gives a fuck who sent the letter? What does it mean? Is the question. I don't give a shit who sent it. It could be fucking Castro's pen pal from Australia. I don't give a damn. I just want to know, like, the hell, like a lot of those documents that were released were from like prior years. Even like, dude, when they scanned these documents, one of them was upside down and it looked like you had to read it through a fucking mirror. Like you can sit there and scan it, but they laminate it so much to where you can't read it on purpose. It's like, we did release it. It's like, oh, well, thanks. Thank God there's like apps out here like Pixel Up and all that other crap.
Well, all we can say for sure about that document is if it's true, the shot didn't work.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's interesting too, because it does sort of bring to mind the ideas in the UFO community about the Men in Black type of thing, and the frequent experience, especially in the early days, 50s and 60s, of people reporting interactions with sort of these vaguely government people doing things like that. Like, you know, Men in Black, they have the little thing that makes you forget everything, including getting zapped with it. So that's pretty neat to me. It does speak to sort of an underlying cultural vague recognition that things like with these like the people being dosed with acid and stuff, like it sounds.
Well, that's Operation Midnight Climax, and
Yeah.
that was Joy on West thing. And Tom O'Neill, the book that Larry showed earlier, that's what him and his he was a UCLA psychiatrist, which is what MK Ultra was on 44 college institutions, and I think we only know about like 36 of them. It's funny. A lot of my friends went to those college institutions, but Operation Midnight Climax was dropping drugs in people's drinks. And it's funny. They would dress up as hippies and have these like Haight-Ashbury things. But
just to think of what I missed when I was in college in the 60s.
I know how much free acid you could have got. Larry, I'd love to trip acid with you. I do acid.
Was not in the right place at the right time,
Let's
obviously.
do the speed round. Earlene Roberts, January 1966. Roberts, Oswald's landlady in Dallas, was said by friends and other witnesses to have been subjected to hours of police interrogation and harassment. She was found dead of a heart attack in her home. No autopsy was performed. Albert Bogard, February. Remember, all these, there's like 126 deaths that I can't say all these are suspicious, but a lot of them were like 64, 65, and 66. And it's just a lot of like how all these people started dropping. But a salesman for downtown Lincoln Mercury in Dallas showed a new Mercury to a man using the name Lee Oswald shortly after giving his testimony to the Warren Commission investigators. He was hospitalized after being badly beaten. Released from the hospital, Bogart returned to his hometown of Howells, Texas. He was found dead in a local cemetery in an automobile with a hose attached to his exhaust. The autopsy was ruled as a suicide. Lee Bowers witnessed a suspicious man standing behind the picket fence on the grassy knoll at the time of the JFK assassination. We didn't talk about the Secret Service member that was flashing a badge up there, and all the Secret Service members said there was no Secret Service member that was stationed up there, but we don't have to talk about that. He was killed in an automobile accident in 66 of August. James Worrell saw a man run from the rear of the Texas School Book Depository after Kennedy was murdered. Worrell was killed in an automobile accident. Now, Roger Craig saw a person exit the side of the Texas School Book Depository building, and he said it was Lee Harvey Oswald, and identified him later when Oswald was in an interrogation room. Well, he got into a Rambler station wagon, and whatever we want to say with that. Jack Ruby told his family members that he had been injected with cancer cells. He also said it in court testimony, giving him the lung cancer that killed him. It's not necessarily true. Ferry, a friend of Oswald's, was struck by a blow to the neck and died of a brain hemorrhage. Now, I thought it was one person that was struck by a neck blow. There was 4 people that I found. One person was, what is it? Jack Coeth. I think I have his document somewhere over here. Oh yeah, I'll share it. Just for anybody that's like, maybe he's not telling the truth. I wouldn't make up a fucking neck. First of all, stepping out of, getting hit in the neck. Like, I showed this to my boss. My boss goes, "That's a trained killer." I was like, "Thank you. That's all I needed. I just needed that." It says right here, Koth, the reporter for the Dallas Times-Herald, was killed by a karate chop to the back of the neck while stepping out of the shower in his apartment. I
That's
mean,
so strange.
bro.
I can, 2 things. I can give you a little background on that because my co-author of my first book, Connie Kritzberg, was a close friend of Kothy's and worked with him actually on the paper there.
Was it a neck chop? Was it a neck chop?
It was, yeah, it was a neck chop. And I think Kothy had told a couple of folks at the paper, Kothy, I think it's important to remember that Kothy had actually, his beat was the basically the local courts, especially the crime scene. And he was very much into Ruby, and following the assassination, he had told them that he had leads and he was conducting his own inquiry into the possibility of Ruby being associated with the assassination or with Oswald. And that made it especially suspicious to her. She knew his family, long story. But the other thing is, Robbie, I am going to have to, I'm an old person.
We've been talking for
I'm going to have to
2.5
leave
hours.
the conversation pretty quickly and go do things.
Real quick.
I gotta leave at 5.
I know.
So
We'll end it in a second, but I want to actually get to the UFO stuff real quick. It's real quick.
Okay.
The Pioneer Plaque. Does anybody know what the Pioneer Plaque is?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Pioneers,
10 and 11 both carried
Sure.
small metal plaques identifying their time and place of origin for the benefit of other spacefarers. Did you know we sent that
Yeah.
to
Yes.
the aliens? No wonder all of them are coming down here trying to get their freak on. We sent them a fucking dick pic. Like, did anybody else notice that? Like, we sent them an intergalactic dick pic, and they're all like, "Why is everybody bundled up down here? What the hell's going on? We thought this was a place to party."
That's hilarious.
Personally, I've always taken it as very chauvinistic because only the guy is going like peace. The woman's just kind of like hanging out, you know.
It's an excellent
I mean, what if
point,
that's
too.
like a threat? Like, what if that's a threat to them? I mean, even the Voyager, we sent like, is it showing the Voyager pics right now?
Just the
No, what it really means is eat me. Like it's a sign of I'm edible. Okay, come on down.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
This is all the Voyager pics that they sent up on that gold record that was up there with like a bunch of music. I listened to some of the music. I don't even know what it means, but like we sent a bunch of these pictures. But like when you start, what the hell is an alien gonna do with all of it? I don't even know what to do with any of this. They're gonna be like, what the hell are they? They're sending us mixed messages. We get a tit pic 1 minute, and then now we're getting all these runners and all these. I don't know what this is, to be 100% honest with you. I mean, if you got these in like a random message on your phone, would you know what the hell was going on, or you would block the number? The aliens.
This defines too much information.
I think the people, when they sent that out there, they didn't think, oh, this could be cool for the public to see, and then they didn't expect anything to get picked up, and the next thing you know, they start getting all these results, and they're like, oh God, someone's gonna have to put out. That's why they keep probing our ass. I don't know. I'm sorry. I had to. To me, that was funny. That's how I was going to start the show. But then we dived down the JFK thing, and it threw me through a loophole.
So that's why the aliens are here. They just start like, what is going on? We got to find out what's with this,
No Bush back. They sent pictures of no Bush. Well, that was like the 70s when they did that. I would think that there would be.
That's hilarious. That's a good point, Robbie. You're really digging into these things.
I told you I don't do conspiracies. I'm doing critical thinking. I'm just joking. I enjoyed the time you guys gave me to talk on the show, man. You know I love talking to you guys. It's always a good time. And plus, we got to talk about the Kennedy assassination. I figured that was going to happen. Me and Larry have been looking through the new documents and working on our own stuff. So
it was a very
kind of
enjoyable
obsessed with
combo. Yeah, I enjoyed that a lot.
Did I yell at you? I didn't yell at you. I was
No, you didn't. And you didn't accuse me of being a bad faith actor, which I am very thankful for.
I told you when I curse out in the hemisphere, and hopefully God isn't, real, so I don't have to worry about it.
It's like generic. Okay.
Yeah, it's not personal. That's fair. Well, don't we all sometimes have to shout at the universe, right?
Yeah, sometimes I scream, let me just win the lotto. But Grandma plays the numbers. If anybody knows that song, it's a good one. Homer Henderson, Lee Harvey Oswald was a friend of mine. Campbell, if you get a chance, look it up. Anybody out there listening, look it up. You will not be upset because it is a great song. Larry, where can people find your links? And then Campbell, you can wrap us up.
It's best just to look for me on Amazon. Look for Larry Hancock on Amazon. It lists all the books, since there's quite a variety at this point in time. But also, I have more recently given up fighting with publishers. And so if you look on Mary Farrell, you'll find my more recent essays. There's an essay on the RFK assassination, Incomplete Justice, a lot of new essays looking more deeply at Oswald and what may have been going on with Oswald that you don't often hear much about. That's on Mary Farrell. So those are the two places I'd suggest.
Campbell?
Yeah. Well, you can check out my stuff on Twitter, UAP Study, my website, uapstudy.com, and on YouTube at the Invisible Night School, which is a group of lay researchers analytically investigating paranormal subjects. We do a show every Wednesday night at 9, and a few of us are skeptics, but we also have open-minded people who are not substance monists and things like that. So we have some good panel discussions with a variety of perspectives. So check that out.
Okay, well, I'm going to link all those links in the description. It's been a pleasure chatting with you fine gentlemen. I'll see you on the next frontier. Thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank podcast, and we'll see you on the next one.